My name is Linda Merigliano, and as Nancy said, I'm on the Bridger-Teton National Forest. I have been working with this concept for quite a few years. I helped on the original Forest Service team in 2002. So it's been actually, I can't believe it, 20 years since we really started developing and trying to operationalize the concept of wilderness character. And then I've served on the various interagency teams to develop the framework and the technical guide, working with a whole team of people, particularly with Peter Landris and Steve Boucher. So excited to kind of share what we've learned in trying to operationalize this concept and what wilderness character is and how we use it, and some of the subtleties or nuances behind the different qualities. So as I'm sure everyone knows, wilderness character is a really fundamental part of what we do in wilderness stewardship. Sure, everyone has heard is that, why do we care about this concept of wilderness character? And very fundamentally, it is the law, and it is our mandate for stewardship. And it is reflected in two parts of the Wilderness Act. Section 2A, which is the policy and really intent behind the Wilderness Act. Congress said that these areas shall be administered for the use and enjoyment of the American people in a manner that leaves them unimpaired for future use and enjoyment, and to provide for the protection of these areas and the preservation of their wilderness character. And then also Section 4B of the Act reiterates that and says that each agency shall be responsible for preserving the wilderness character of the areas that they manage. So this has come up repeatedly, this is our central stewardship mandate. But there hasn't been that much work until the early 2000s on what does that really mean? Howard Zonnheiser, one of the key authors of the Act, wrote specifically about this and said that the purpose of the Wilderness Act is to preserve the wilderness character of the areas to be included in the system, not to establish any particular use. And so right there in that writing, we get the sense that wilderness character was intended to be this more kind of fuzzy but holistic idea of what we're trying to protect in wilderness. Not it isn't just protecting wildlife habitat or providing opportunities for recreation. It's something bigger than that. And also, one of the things that Howard Zonnheiser was very adamant about is that we're trying to communicate a positive vision for wilderness, what we're managing for, not just dwelling on the prohibited uses in a particular area. There's oftentimes you hear people define wilderness of, well, you can't have roads there, or you can't take a motor vehicle in, or a bicycle and things, and all the prohibited uses. But what are we managing for? The positive side of that. And that's where wilderness character comes in. So why does this matter? Is fundamentally, we're trying to use this to improve our stewardship. And you may have seen in the past that in other presentations is that one of the things that we know about the process of wilderness designation is that the criteria for designating an area are less than what we actually, once an area is designated, is that we should try to improve over time the wilderness character of that area. And so our job as managers and stewards of these special places is to sustain or improve wilderness character since the time of designation. So there's lots and lots of cases where a wilderness was designated and it might have old roads in it. It might have evidence of old mines or other kinds of structures. And over time, we can let those things fade back into the landscape, or in some cases do active restoration and improve the conditions that we're seeing out there. Another reason why this is really important is in 2014 was the 50th anniversary of the Wilderness Act, and all 4 of the federal agencies responsible for wilderness entered into an agreement with coming up with a cohesive strategy, which was called the 2020 vision, of what was important to guide the stewardship of the National Wilderness Preservation System. And on the top of that list was the first priority was to complete these wilderness character inventories using standardized interagency protocols and ongoing monitoring, and incorporating this concept into all of our activities over the next 5 years. So we're still in that process of trying to make sure that every unit really has developed what wilderness character means for that particular area, and some assessment of where we are today. So what is this concept? It's pretty clear that there is no definition of wilderness character that's explicitly written into the Wilderness Act, nor is it in the legislative record and things. But a number of legal scholars have written, and this has been supported by the courts and everything, that the best approximation of wilderness character can be found in the definition of wilderness that is in Section 2C of the Act. And so we take the Wilderness Act, we know we've got this mandate for wilderness character, we look to Section 2C of the Act and the definition there to come up with these qualities of wilderness character. And again, this was all outlined in the document, Keeping It Wild, which is this interagency framework that was originally written and then updated in 2015. So this is the definition that was included based on the definition of wilderness that is found in Section 2C. And again, a very holistic concept based on 3 really important elements: the biophysical environment that's free from modern human manipulation and impact, personal experiences, and symbolic meanings of humility, restraint, and interdependence. And so the thing that is, I think, an incredible privilege as wilderness managers and stewards is that we're working with an act that combines and integrates the natural environment, the social environment, and ethical considerations about how we as humans interact with the natural world. And those are that symbolic meaning of humility and restraint. And so attention to all 3 of those really infuses what we do in managing these special places. But ultimately, when we talk about wilderness character, the word character, we're trying to figure out what distinguishes wilderness from other lands. And again, it's based on these qualities of an environment that's primarily free from modern human manipulation. It's these personal experiences in an environment that is relatively free from the encumbrances and signs of modern society, and this meaning of an approach of humility and restraint. And so it isn't that a wilderness may not have wildlife that are different than what you might find outside a wilderness, or it might not have plants and air, and those pieces might not be different, but it's these qualities that we're trying to advance that make wilderness different. And some of these are very tangible qualities and things that you can really grab onto and measure easily. Some are more intangible values. And we'll talk about how that's dealt with a little bit. So what are these qualities and that are derived from the definition of wilderness character? And again, it's kind of this elusive beast. But there are 4 qualities that apply to every single wilderness. And those are these 4. Wilderness is a place that is untrammeled by human activity. It's undeveloped federal land. It retains its natural conditions, and it provides outstanding opportunities for solitude or a primitive and unconfined type of recreation. Well, the definition of wilderness also includes a 5th quality that may apply, but doesn't have to be present in every wilderness. And that's this other features of value. And in the definition, it talks about that wilderness may contain other geologic or educational features of value that have conservation value, historical value, scientific value, and things. And so we'll talk more about that. But again, those 4 main qualities are things that shall be provided in every wilderness. So let's explore these a little bit more. The untrammeled quality. And again, this is a word that is still somewhat misunderstood by a lot of people. It is a kind of an archaic term that Zonheiser and others selected specifically because they didn't feel that any other word would really capture the essence of what they were trying to advance. And a trammel is a net or something that restrains an animal or something. And so the fact that wilderness is untrammeled is that it was intended to be essentially unhindered and free from modern human control or manipulation. And this is really the quality that speaks to our approach to manage with humility and restraint, that as people, we don't know everything, and to respect the autonomy of nature and let a place be wild. Things. So I think that one of the things that came out of developing this concept of wilderness character that was really important is that in the past, people tended to mix the untrammeled quality with the natural quality and not understand what the difference was between those two. And so they got kind of it was often treated the same. and that caused some problems. By calling out the untrammeled quality, we can really say, are we truly managing with humility and restraint and ensuring that human activities are minimizing our interference with the ecological processes? So as Roderick Nash said, this is really the expression of the ideal of what wilderness is about. Wilderness preservation is a gesture of planetary modesty, an ethical expression and demonstration of our capacity for self-restraint. And that's that capacity is often tested. Things we're not, as humans, we oftentimes want to do stuff and take action. And sometimes the best answer is to be hands off and to let nature roll the dice. So in working with this particular quality, what it is degraded by is, and again, the focus is on the actions, not the effect, the actions that manipulate the environment. And so, again, the Wilderness Act is talking about that this wilderness is a place where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man. So it really is speaking to what we do as managers when we take action to manipulate something. Are we adding animals or plants? Are we removing animals or plants? Are we manipulating those ecological processes in some way? So these are the kinds of things that we do as managers that affect that untrammeled quality. There also could be non-authorized actions that manipulate the environment. And those are things like dumping a bunch of fish in a stream or a lake. Thanks. But again, this quality is really talking about what we do as managers. And I'm going to add a document in a bit into the chat that is the appendix from the framework that kind of goes through how do you decide what is a trammeling action? And it's a pretty handy reference if you're working with this concept. So the natural quality here is the Wilderness Act says that wilderness is again, federal land that's retaining its primeval character and is protected and managed so as to preserve its natural conditions and things. This is a tough one to deal with. It's what we're talking about is that the wilderness biophysical conditions are substantially free from the effects of modern human civilization. So with untrammeled, we were talking about the actions, the decision to take action. This one, we're talking about what are the effects from activities on that natural environment. And obviously, wilderness should be the expression where you know, as Leopold talked about, where all the parts are still there, and we retain the native species and patterns and processes, and that wilderness becomes a place where we can really understand and learn about how natural processes function. But again, the Act did not say anything about what the natural conditions ought to look like. It's more focused on letting natural processes operate as freely as possible, and then what are the natural conditions that result from that and things. And so we do accept that wilderness is going to be a dynamic natural system. And the way that we've been looking at this is you can debate forever, you know, what is natural. And but there's three kind of fundamental things. Are all of the original parts there? the elements that were part of that environment, is trying to keep the invasives out and allow natural processes to function. And obviously that's a little easier said than done. But the way that we tried to operationalize this, because it's so hard to say what is natural, is instead, again, focusing on what are those threats that influence the natural conditions. And so we're looking at operationalizing this with what is the air quality like? What is the water quality like? Are there invasive plants or animals? How much grazing is occurring that might be manipulating that vegetative community? Are fire regimes fundamentally out of whack? So undeveloped comes from the act, is that wilderness is a place that is in contrast with those areas where humans dominate the landscape. It's an undeveloped federal land without permanent improvements or human habitation. And again, the way that this has been operationalized is that wilderness is essentially free of permanent improvements, modern human occupation, and motorized equipment or mechanical transport. And so we specifically, it's pretty clear from the wilderness writings that this was not to diminish the role that Native people played on the landscape and things, but we're talking about modern human occupation, not what might have occurred in previous eras. And again, this comes from kind of fundamentally that the Wilderness Act statement was to assure that an increasing population accompanied by expanding settlement and growing mechanization does not occupy and modify all areas. And things. So this one is a little bit more tangible, is most people do think of wilderness as a place that is largely undeveloped. And so what we're looking at here is are there structures or installations? Is there the use of motor vehicles, motorized equipment, or mechanical transport, and inholdings that might lead to more development and occupation and things? And so the interesting one with part of this particular quality is that why is this the use of motor vehicles and motorized equipment and mechanical transport, why was it included in this quality and not under the solitude quality? And a lot of people think that motor vehicles and mechanical transport, it's just because of the noise or it affecting the visitor. And that's true. It does have an effect on visitors, but it was included in this quality because of a fundamental, the reason for the prohibition on motor vehicles and motorized equipment in the Act has nothing to do with the impact on visitors. It was prohibited in the Act because it's that technology and equipment that allows people to manipulate and modify environments. So Howard Zonnheiser has a pretty prominent quote that there is a need for areas of the earth where we stand without the mechanisms that make us immediate masters of our environment. So again, what they were trying to protect is that where we use motor equipment to develop and modify the environment, those kinds of technology allow us to manipulate the environment much more easily than if we're just using hand tools and traditional kinds of skills. And so that's why that prohibition exists. And that's why it's in this undeveloped quality and not under the other quality. So the fourth quality is, wilderness provides outstanding opportunities for solitude or a primitive and unconfined type of recreation and things. And the thing to understand with this one is that there's a lot of writing that has occurred in trying to understand how people were, the framers of the act were looking at this concept of solitude and how that related to primitive and unconfined recreation, and what did solitude really mean. And it's pretty clear from the writing that it wasn't intended to say that you had to be alone in wilderness. It doesn't equal being alone. It really was talking about that wilderness needs to be providing the opportunities for people to have some separation from modern civilization and not, and have a chance to be separated from the sounds and sights of civilization, and allow for that operating on your own time, discovering and growing based on your own skills, and being somewhat free from the societal obligations of the phone ringing all the time, or all of the obligations that can get in the way sometimes of just slowing down and operating at a more of a human scale. So that's pretty clear from the writings. It's this holistic concept. And so here, these are the kinds of things that we pay attention to in this particular quality, is the sounds and sights of people inside the wilderness definitely affect it. We need to provide, though it's not about being alone, we need to provide an environment where there is a chance to not feel like you're, in a big crowd, and you can have the time to linger at a viewpoint, or go at your own pace and not feel like you're constantly being pushed up the trail and things. It should be an environment where the sounds and sights of occupied and modified areas outside of the wilderness. So there's a lot more attention now that is being paid on soundscapes, dark skies, things like that, those are becoming increasingly rare in our society. And so wildernesses these areas where there's a definite mandate to provide for these outstanding opportunities, those might be the places that allow people to experience being in the dark and being able to actually see the stars, or not being in an environment where they're hearing natural noise and creeks and birds and things like that, rather than human generated noise. And then in terms of primitive and unconfined recreation, is that again, is wilderness should be a place where we're not reliant on the facilities to provide that provide kind of user comfort and convenience, and we rely on our own, what we bring in to help us camp and travel in that area. And then also just the management restrictions on visitor behavior is an unconfined environment where there is some ability to make your own choices. So finally, again, this quality may apply, doesn't have to, but the focus here is on specific features, things. And in the way that this has been operationalized is it's really providing an opportunity to look at cultural resources and geological resources that might exist in an area that are really integral and add a lot more meaning to that particular place. And so the challenge with this particular quality is trying to determine what is truly integral to wilderness character, what helps distinguish that place from other places, and what gives it the meaning. And so the way that we try to do that is, like, if there's something that was in the enabling legislation for a particular area, like that was called out, that might be something that was really special about that area and part of the reason why it was designated. So there's things that are on cultural sites that are on the National Register of Historic Places. There could be the name of the wilderness might reflect something that is really special. There's, I think I tried to look up all the wilderness names that were around a particular feature, like Fossil Ridge. Well, there might be some just incredibly unique fossils in that particular place that gives it, that wilderness, some very rich meaning and needs to be part of what we're saying we're really going to protect in that area. National geological areas, things like that. So so it offers an opportunity to call out those things that are the specific features that really need to be protected and give an area a lot of meaning. So one of the things I'm talking about is that probably you think, well, geez, there's some trade-offs here. Is you know, as we look at these different qualities, ideally we want to maximize all of these qualities, but there's always trade-offs and choices that need to be made. So here's a situation with a stream. It might be 11 feet wide. Normally in the more natural part of the stream, but where the trail crosses, it's been significantly widened, and it's 47 feet at that spot. It's habitat for threatened trout, and there's quite a bit of soil deposition that's occurring in that water, affecting the water quality and things. And so as managers, you know, do we put in a bridge and things to try to help restore that? And that might be the right choice here, and that might help protect the natural quality. But what's the effect on that opportunity for primitive recreation and unconfined, and the challenge that comes with trying to figure out how you're going to cross that stream on your own? And so again, there isn't any right or wrong answer here, but you have to weigh what is overall best for wilderness character in that particular situation and the context of you know, if it's a trail that receives very, very little use, or it's in a place that you don't want to encourage more use, maybe doing some things to just try to protect the stream banks would be sufficient without putting in a bridge and things. So those are all the kind of choices of how we might use this to look at overall what's best for wilderness character. So just a couple of really key topics or key points about wilderness character is, again, in how this has been operationalized, is the focus is on these tangible attributes. It applies to every wilderness. I know there was a lot of debate about, well, wilderness is different in the East, or wilderness is different in Alaska. And yet we all operate under the same act. And the point is that we're not comparing one wilderness to another. We're trying to, within every wilderness, just move the conditions up towards better wilderness character, whatever that particular wilderness is. And so again, each wilderness is compared against itself over time. They're not compared against each other. And another point, and this has come up before, the monitoring and these attributes that we're tracking under wilderness character doesn't reflect all the monitoring that might be needed. There's a lot of compliance monitoring that occurs in wilderness, particularly with like outfitter guide, special use permits and things like that. And that's important monitoring, and it just isn't tracked under the wilderness character. Thanks. And another thing that has been a source of a lot of debate is all 5 of these qualities are equally important, but the untrammeled quality is given slightly more weight, all other things being equal. And when we're looking at where a wilderness is at, the baseline is, of course, ideally at the time of designation, but from a practical standpoint, it might be the first year that you really pull together the information relative to the monitoring elements under what you're actually measuring and things. So the way that this is all pulled together is this is another key point, is trying to find this balance between some national consistency and local relevance. We're all part of a national wilderness preservation system. And so working with all 4 of the agencies, we're all operating under the requirement to preserve wilderness character. We're all working with these same 5 qualities. And what we've been able to accomplish with the framework is that we're all working with the same monitoring questions and the same indicators. At the measure level of how we're actually going to measure those particular indicators, there is opportunities for local units to pick what's most relevant for their area. So in the Forest Service, that has been done by having every wilderness can pick their measures. Some are required, and some you have choices on which ones to pick based on what's most relevant to your specific wilderness. So, and another just key point is that wilderness character is more than the sum of its part. It is a holistic concept, and again, there's these intangibles that go along with the more concrete things that we can measure. And so the way that we deal with that is that we've been putting a lot of emphasis on spending time to really develop what's called the wilderness character narrative. And what that is it allows you to, in a story format, really draw out what is it about this particular wilderness that is important to protect. What does untrammeled mean for, in this case, the Gros Ventre wilderness? what does the undeveloped quality mean? What are those key key aspects that contributed to why the area was designated, and what makes it unique in light of a larger context? And I'll give you one example of that. Is we were working on the narrative for the Teton Wilderness, which is on the northern, right below Yellowstone National Park, and it's over 500,000 acres. Long history of stock use. It's always been known as one of those premier stock oriented wildernesses that really could meet the definition of absorbing a 2-week pack trip, and a long fire history of had one of the first natural fire plans. So those are all aspects that can be called out. But in thinking about it in a larger context, is many wildernesses of that size have airstrips, and the Teton Wilderness never did. So there's never been a history of airplanes ever flying in there. And that's actually pretty unique for a place that could have easily had that history. And so calling out, what makes it distinguishes from other places. So you do have to understand a little bit about the regional and national context to draw out what is important about your particular wilderness. And so again, this is an opportunity to really help tell a story of what is important about that place, and to bring in some of the intangibles along with the more tangible aspects. So I really encourage using this in that way. And then the way that this again is as I mentioned, the qualities are all the same across all agencies, and then the monitoring questions are all the same, and then the indicators are all the same. So, as we showed earlier, in the untrammeled quality, we're looking at 2 indicators: actions authorized by the federal land manager and actions that were not authorized. These are things that were done illegally, or we just didn't know that they were happening. Things under the natural quality, we're tracking 4 different indicators: plants, animals, air and water, ecological processes. In the undeveloped quality, we're tracking in what are the trends in the non-recreational physical development. And so the presence of non-recreational structures, the presence of inholdings, and then again, what are those trends in mechanization and the use of motor vehicles, motorized equipment, or mechanical transport. Under the solitude and primitive and unconfined recreation, we're tracking 1 question around solitude and 1 question around outstanding opportunities for primitive and unconfined. And the indicators there are remoteness from the sounds and sights inside wilderness, the remoteness from sounds and sights outside wilderness, and then in the primitive and unconfined, facilities that decrease self-reliant recreation, and then management restrictions. And then in the last quality, other features of value, again, if this is something that is important in your wilderness, we're tracking the deterioration or loss of integral cultural features, and then kind of a catch-all deterioration or loss of other site-specific features of value that might be unique to your wilderness. And then the specific measures under this, again, depends on your local unit. and things. And so once you've got all your measures, what you're doing in monitoring those is that we track the number of authorized actions, and then over a 5-year period, is the trend in the number of actions increasing? Are there more actions over the 5-year period, or are there less? And so is the trend upward or downward? And then again, all you're doing to pull it all together is it's just kind of a business rule type of thing, is if we're seeing an improvement in the number of actions, then the trend in that particular measure is upward, and then that just gets carried forward. And so it's basically, trying to think of a simple example here. Let's just use the untrammeled quality. Is if there's an improving trend in the number of authorized actions, meaning that over time we've seen less human interference, and then the number of unauthorized actions has been stable, there's really no up or down trend, then the indicator, because there's only one measure for that particular indicator, those stay the same. And then when you combine it, this is stable and this is improving. So the overall trend in that question is improving. And again, there's only one question for this quality. So then the quality is improving. And if we go down to here, the undeveloped quality, there's been an improving trend in this aspect, and in the number of administrative authorizations to use motorized equipment. There's been an improving trend in that aspect, and a declining trend in special provision authorizations, but they balance each other out. And so here, this little symbol is basically they offset each other. And then, and so it can basically counts as stable, and an improving trend in this aspect. So the overall trend is upward. And then you just combine all of these, is that you have 3 trends that are improving, one trend that's where natural quality is declining, and staying relatively stable in the solitude. So the overall trend of wilderness character is upward for that reporting period. So it's just a simple, looking at up and down arrows. And we do that. It's a pretty standard way of kind of combining apples and oranges in a way that gives you some sense of what the overall condition is. And that's one of the things that about wilderness character that in the past, in the way that we've worked in wilderness, is that we've really focused on just different pieces, but we haven't had a framework to pull it all together and say, what does this mean in terms of our central mandate to preserve wilderness character? And so this framework now gives us that opportunity to say, what is that trend? And we can look at short-term trends, long-term trends, and things overall, and have a framework that can transcend individual managers. So from that, we can produce local reports of what's the trend in the untrammeled quality, what's the trend in the natural quality, and things, and then give a little bit more information about why we're seeing that trend. So again, adding a little bit more context so that it isn't just about the numbers. And use this to, present to decision makers and things and saying, we're not doing so well in one particular quality. What are the opportunities that we have to try to reverse that trend and show an improvement? So again, really we can start to see how our management actions are affecting the trend that we're seeing in wilderness character. So kind of the last little poll here is I'm curious, again, using the annotation tool, is how do you think you might incorporate wilderness character into your work this year? And one thing might be just to find out, is there a wilderness character narrative that has been drafted or in the works for your particular wilderness? And we are considering those documents to be living documents that can always be improved. And so one of the things we're doing now is going back and really working with partners and building some relationships with some tribal communities and looking at what this landscape has meant to the tribal communities and try to really integrate that into the narrative for the wilderness. And so even though I thought we were done with the wilderness character narrative, we're going to open it back up and allow for that refinement. You might be working on conducting monitoring and ask the question of how is it fit within the wilderness character? Could there be some things that you could do to help communicate the results? We typically are not very good about that. You could be incorporating wilderness character into public education programs, or participating in interdisciplinary discussions about some particular management action, and how might that affect the wilderness character for your particular area. And then I think there's huge opportunities for developing signing or videos or to help elevate the story of what is that story of what wilderness character means for a specific wilderness. So anyways, take a few moments and I'm curious if you have ideas of how you might incorporate that work.
One comment, we are hoping to do exactly what you mentioned and bring our narratives to the tribes for input.
Oh, good. Yeah, and I really would encourage that. Is that's one thing that I've heard, and Nancy, maybe you can speak to this too, is we are actively saying that the narrative should be a living document. And if it can be improved and we can bring more voices, it's going to be a way that we can build more support and get past some of these barriers that we frankly have missed voices, missed the opportunity to include some important voices in our work. So we should be open to that.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, Linda. And I think we're all learning about this whole wilderness character monitoring process. And I think that's really important that as we learn, we add to what we've done, because I think there's always room for it to evolve.
Right. And I definitely feel is ultimately, if we can keep working on that wilderness character narrative and really honing in on, what makes this place special? What distinguishes it? What are we trying to protect? And build that into a really compelling story. That is going to go so far in terms of working with the public when difficult decisions are being made about different management actions. Is we've got to keep coming back to ultimately what are we trying to protect in things, and so if we have that really strong narrative, it's just such a great starting point. Oh, good. Yeah. I see Chris's comment here is I think there's a lot of opportunities for trailhead signing, for little videos or podcasts or ways that wilderness character could be incorporated into how we communicate with. And again, this is a place where bringing partners into the picture can be really powerful. That is all I have is opening up for, please, unmute yourself and ask any questions, or I know that was a lot of stuff to go through. So if there's something that wasn't understandable, or you want more explanation, please ask.
Hey, Linda, thanks a lot. That was wonderful. I'm sorry I missed the very beginning, but in the Wilderness Character Toolbox in wilderness.net, does it have all the character narratives across the country? Or is that actually information in there where you can see what other people have done?
Where I think that is there is a, for the folks that are working in the Forest Service, there is a opinion folder for wilderness character monitoring that Julie King maintains, and there are files for every single region, and so everyone is supposed to upload, in order to, because obviously I didn't talk about it here because I think it gets too much depth, but for the infra wild reporting, wilderness character is one of the elements that we need to report progress on as far as our stewardship performance. And so in order to take advantage, to claim those points in stewardship performance, you have to upload everything to those files in Pinion. And so what I don't know is I'm assuming that if you have access to that Pinion folder, you have access to every single region in the country. So if you don't have access to that Pinion folder, contact Julie King.
Thank you.
And Nancy, is that correct in your mind?
Actually, Julie retired, and right now,
okay.
Yeah, Christina Boston is the acting Wilderness Character Monitoring Program Manager, and I believe they'll have a permanent person in the position fairly soon, but Christina Boston will be the contact for now.
Okay. And that has been helpful to, I'm actually just in the process of uploading. I took some of our stuff out just because we were refining it, but I've got to go back and upload all of our character narratives back into that box. So, but that is the official place where we're supposed to store all documents.
And Linda, real quick, I'm going to drop Drew Lindsay's contact in the chat. He works on the WCM Central team alongside Christina, and I know he facilitates the who's part of the Pinion group.
We had one question in the chat here. Linda, which I was just typing in some information. And is there literature you would recommend to learn more about the history of the Wilderness Act?
Doug Scott's books.
We did also put some resources in the Fundamentals of Wilderness presentation, which was recorded. And at the end of that story map that Ben Clark created, we had some links to some resources. There's also on Wilderness Connect, there's a toolbox that I can't remember what it's called, but it kind of, I do know that it has some information on kind of the beginnings of how the Wilderness Act was created. And yeah, Wilderness in the American Mind.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Well, those are been the standard text, but there's also been some newer references that I think are really good too.
Yeah, I agree.
And things. So I did just put in the chat the reference that I mentioned about what is a trammeling action, and how that is because it does get a little bit nuanced of, if you're just doing a little bit of restoration on a trail and you're, transplanting some plants or anything, is because the untrammeled quality is really looking at interference with ecological processes. If it's super, super small scale, we're not counting it and things. And it was just some decisions that had to be made of what was practical to really keep track of versus what wasn't and things. And so you'll find some things that, you could argue that it's all trammeling, but you have to draw the line somewhere in terms of what can you do in a consistent way across all agencies and across all wildernesses. And so that gets into a little bit of that and things. But yeah, and I think maybe just one last comment is again, this gets into a little bit more on how it's used in management decisions and things. But ultimately, I would just caution is that we're not using these qualities of wilderness character to trade off one quality against another. The different arrows and everything is just a way to operationalize and see what the overall trend is. But when we're making management decisions, we're really striving to make improvements in all of the qualities. But there's lots of nuance, particularly around when we get into some of the issues around fire and how and fish and wildlife kinds of issues that get really tricky in terms of what is that trade-off between the natural quality and the untrammeled quality. And oftentimes we're taking a short-term trammeling action in order to provide a larger benefit to the natural quality in the long run. But we need to be able to really show that there's a long-term benefit to wilderness character, and that can get a little tricky. So I don't want to underestimate that that's, that this isn't super easy when you're getting into some really tough management choices that we're oftentimes faced with today. But from the field level, I think that if we can start really developing that wilderness character and that narrative around what is it that ultimately we're trying to protect and really build that, that's going to go a long way to helping make some choices about what are we really benefiting wilderness character in the long run for that particular area.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. I really enjoyed that presentation, and I learn every time. And wilderness character is such a thought-provoking topic. It's and definitely something we wrestle with and ponder in our daily work. So thank you very much for joining us and taking time